Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session today on awakening wisdom and compassion in daily life. So we all want to be wiser and more compassionate, yes, but how do we awaken wisdom and compassion in our daily lives is the question. So today we have Pema Düddul back with us. And for those of you who don't know Pema, let me introduce him. So Pema is the co-director of Jalü Centre for Buddhist Practice. Pema has been a Buddhist for 40 years, discovering at the age of 11 that his personal worldview and the tenets of Buddhism were in perfect accordance. Pema has decades of experience as a Buddhist practitioner and has taught mindfulness and meditation in Buddhist, educational, and other settings since 2007. Pema has a doctorate, so a PhD in creative writing, and is a co-author along with Jamyang Tenphel of Resting in Stillness, a book about meditation, compassion, and the nature of the mind. And his book of contemplative poetry, Here We Settle, was published by Luminous Awareness Publications in 2022, so it's pretty new, folks, as was his book, Luminous Awareness, a guidebook to natural awakening, life and in death. So those books sound really amazing, and we're excited to have the author right here with us. So friends, as usual, we begin with a guided meditation and a talk by Pema, and then Tina will facilitate the Q&A discussions towards the end of the session. So now over to you, Pema.
Okay, thanks. So before we begin talking and sitting, we'll just set our intention. So in the Dharma, our intention is to free ourselves and all others from the suffering of cyclic existence. So I'd just like to share two stanzas of the Bodhisattva's Way of Life by Shantideva, an 8th century Buddhist master from India. May I be a protector for those without one, a guide for all travellers on the way. May I become a bridge, a raft or boat for all who wish to cross the water. May I be an isle for those desiring landfall and a lamp for those who wish for light. May I be a place of comfort for those who need to rest and a servant for all who live in need. Okay. So we'll do a little bit of abiding or shamatha meditation. So for that, any posture is okay, so long as the back is basically straight. For me, I find that hands, palms down on the knees is the most comfortable place for the hands, but you can also put them in your lap in the mudra of equanimity or in the lotus mudra. You can have your eyes open or closed. In our tradition, we tend to have them open. If you have them open, you are gazing gently into space about an arm's length and a half in front of you with a slightly downward gaze, so that's sort of along the nose, a little in front of you. If you close your eyes, then you just close them and rest them. And then we just place our awareness very gently on our breathing, not on a particular point of entry or exit of the breathing, just on the whole experience of breathing. So the whole in and out of the body. And we just have our awareness very gently on the breathing, very, very lightly. If thoughts come, we let them come, but then we let them go again. Thoughts by their nature rise, abide for a moment, and then dissolve of their own accord. We don't have to do anything with them. We just remain relaxed, our awareness gently on our breathing, settled, calm. As we begin, you can feel life and vigor and love flowing in And as we breathe out, we can feel all tension and stress dissolving and flowing out. And then we just rest in the now, not worrying about the past, not worrying about the future, just settled in this present nowness, in this comfortable position, right where we are. So we'll just sit for a few minutes, starting now. Okay. Remaining calm, we end our formal sitting. We bring our awareness into the moment with us, into whatever we're doing now. Remaining relaxed with our awareness lucid. Just take a few seconds to get into the place of doing a Dharma talk. And then we'll get started. Okay. Thanks everyone for being here. So the topic of this talk is awakening wisdom and compassion in everyday life, which is quite big. Don't really have, we'll probably talk about this for many, many hours, but we'll just do it in one. So to begin, I thought we might just really quickly cover what is wisdom and what is compassion, which we should all kind of know, but we'll just cover it anyway. So wisdom in a Buddhist context is the realization of sunyata or emptiness. So sunyata, as we know, is approached through a cognitive understanding of what it is and then experienced directly through meditation. So true wisdom is in the experience of sunyata, not in the intellectual knowledge. Having said that, two things point to sunyata: impermanence or change, and the absence of inherence of existence. So you've probably heard that phrase before, the absence of inherence of existence. So impermanence and change we can directly observe. We can look at the world and we can see things changing, coming into being and fading into non-being or vanishing. But lack of inherent existence requires a little bit of analysis and reflection, but it also isn't difficult to comprehend. The mark of emptiness, or the marks of emptiness, are that everything is made up of causes and conditions, parts and labels. So it has these three things: causes and conditions, parts and labels. So, and that's in order of easiest to understand to a bit more, to sort of take some sort of subtle looking. So if we look at any object, we can look for its inherent self-nature in any of its parts, in any of its causes and conditions, or in any of its labels, the things we call it. Spoiler alert, we won't find inherent self-nature anywhere because it isn't anywhere, it isn't there. So having said that, it's important to understand that sunyata is more than just the fact that things are impermanent and lacks inherence of existence. Sunyata is deep interconnectedness, dynamic fluidity, profound openness, limitless potentiality, shadowless luminosity, and vast spaciousness, which is why often in our tradition the symbol or sign used for emptiness is the sky or space. So that can only be experienced through meditation. Cognitively, we can't grasp that. So meditation is essential. Analysis and reflection won't awaken that wisdom for us, but it will give us a picture, an idea of what emptiness is, what it means for us in a day-to-day living way. And that understanding actually relieves suffering. So if we understand things are impermanent, they lack self-nature, we won't grasp, we won't cling, we won't chase. We also won't run away from things. We'll have less grasping, also less fear, less attachment, less aversion. So that cognitive understanding does help, but true understanding of emptiness or wisdom comes only through practice, through meditation. So many of the great masters from all the various Buddhist traditions, just too many to name, I've said that realization of sunyata or emptiness leads to the natural and spontaneous dawning of compassion. So when we opened the talk, I said, so what is wisdom? It's realization of emptiness. And here we see that realization of emptiness or shunyata leads to the natural outflowing of compassion. So how can it be? And it's because compassion is actually our natural state. It's covered up by self-cherishing and ego-clinging, but is there at the heart of us. It's a boundless compassion that is to ordinary kindness like a sun to a match flame. They're not comparable. So this boundless compassion at the heart of us, we have absolutely no idea how profound and deep and luminous it is. No idea. Our ordinary kindness, our relative compassion, they're good things, but they're pale in comparison to that natural compassion at the heart of us. So that compassion that is our true nature or Buddha nature doesn't need to be cultivated. It's already there. It's already perfect. So it doesn't need to be cultivated. It doesn't need to be refined, polished, or cleaned up. It just needs to be revealed. It just needs to be allowed to shine. So these things, the idea that we have an inherent compassionate nature, which in our tradition we call bodhicitta, the awakening mind of compassion, and the idea that realizing emptiness allows that to flower fully, indicates for us that our focus in our life should be on meditation, on realizing shunyata. And the great 11th century monk, Atisha Dipankara, made this very clear. I'm going to read out a little quote for you. I can make it available to you after the talk. All the elements on the path are contained within the 6 transcendent perfections. Now, if you truly realize emptiness, you become free from attachment. As you feel no craving, grasping, or desire for anything within or without, you always have transcendent generosity. Being free from grasping and attachment, you are never defiled by negative actions, so you always have transcendent discipline. Without any conceptions of I and mine, you have no anger, so you always have transcendent patience. Your mind, made truly joyful by the realization of emptiness, you always have transcendent diligence. Being free from distraction, which comes from grasping at things as solid, you always have transcendent concentration. As you do not conceptualize anything whatsoever in terms of subject, object, and action, so that's me, you, and doing, you always have transcendent wisdom. So it's quite clear that the realization of emptiness through meditation brings about the paramitas, the 6 transcendent perfections, naturally. So even though much of our energy and focus should be on meditation, we also need to cultivate compassion, and there's a very simple reason for that. Realization of shunyata takes a long time, yet sentient beings are suffering right now. They need us. We can't wait for realization to help them. It's true, however, that we can't truly help sentient beings until we are awakened, because whatever we do to help will be tainted by self-clinging. So it will only be partially helpful and temporarily helpful. But we can help them in small ways right now on the relative level, and that's really kind of important. And that's where the paramitas on the relative level become important. So this isn't easy to hear, but 90% of the suffering in the world that we experience and that others experience is caused by us, by ourselves. Most of the suffering in the world is caused by our habitually negative thought patterns, emotions, reactions, and behaviours. We certainly are the root cause of the majority of our own misery. And sadly, we harm others as well, quite often, more often than we'd like to admit. Our samsaric state, so being trapped in this cycle of delusion, means that we aren't even aware often that we are harming beings continuously. through our self-cherishing and our egocentrism. We're often not even aware of it. Therefore, to reduce the suffering of others and reduce our own suffering, we need to get our house in order. We need to tame our thoughts, our emotions and reactions, and most especially, we need to tame our behaviour. So that's what we call in Mahayana Buddhism the path of the Bodhisattva. Taming our own mind and behaviour so that we cease to harm others. Often when we think about the Bodhisattva or the Bodhisattva's method or way of life, we often think purely about compassion, but actually the method of a Bodhisattva is about taming the mind as much as about compassion. So as Düddul Rinpoche, my own teacher, echoing the Buddha, taught, the root of Dharma is your mind. Tame it and you're practicing Dharma. To practice Dharma is to tame your mind. And when you tame it, then you will be free. It's very simple. So as I've already alluded, the Bodhisattva's main methods for taming the mind and awakening wisdom and compassion are the 6 Paramitas, or the 6 transcendent perfections. And they are generosity, discipline or ethics, patience, joyful effort or diligence, concentration or mindfulness, and wisdom. So everything on the Bodhisattva's path is encompassed by these qualities. So when we talk about the Bodhisattva's way of life, this is it. It is the Paramitas. Everything on the Bodhisattva path is the Paramitas. And the Paramitas in themselves, like all practices in the Buddha Dharma, are pure and perfect and are a complete path in themselves. So this path of applying the Paramitas can lead to enlightenment, like all Buddhist practices can on their own. Each practice is complete in itself. So the Paramitas are expressed through body, speech, and mind. They come to life through acts of the body, acts of speech, and acts of the mind. Generally, they are directed outwards towards sentient beings, towards the benefit of others. But what's not generally understood is that they're also directed inwards, towards oneself. The Paramitas are not about self-denial or acting the martyr. They're about compassion and kindness toward all sentient beings. And that includes ourselves. The balance, however, is towards others because we're already quite good at putting ourselves first. And another aspect of the Paramitas that we might miss is that they are also directed towards the Dharma itself. So these 3 things are the recipients of our efforts when we're practicing the Paramitas. Ourselves, other sentient beings, all other sentient beings, without limits, and the Dharma itself. So on the Sutrayana level, in the blow to this talk, I said I would talk about the Sutra level, the Mahayana level, and the Dzogchen level. So on the Sutrayana level, we actively renounce or abandon the Paramitas. They're opposites. So we abandon the Paramitas opposite. So with generosity, we renounce greed. With patience, we renounce anger. With discipline or ethics, we renounce harming others. It's fairly simple. On the Mahayana level, we actively cultivate the Paramita itself. So we use body, speech, and mind to bring the Paramitas into everyday life. So I'll cover the Dzogchen approach to the Paramitas at the end of the talk if we have time. That's a unique sort of Tibetan approach. So I'm going to go now I'll go over each Paramita in turn, just kind of really briefly. And then I'm hoping to have space at the end so we can talk. So the first one obviously is generosity or giving. And that Paramita is first because it is the foundation of the Bodhisattva path. Without that Paramita of giving, of body, speech, and mind, the others don't arise. They're blocked. So that one requires a little extra effort, generosity. So that Paramita of generosity dissolves selfishness and grasping or greed. So we need to actively engage in generosity or giving through the body, the speech, and the mind towards ourselves, other sentient beings, and towards the Dharma. So obviously generosity of the body is about material giving. So giving the things that we're most attached to is the best kind of material giving. but any kind of giving is good. And then with the speech, it's to say supportive and kind things to others. So that's kind of generosity, to be kind and compassionate towards others with our speech. And then, to give the gift of the kind word. And then with the mind, it's to think generously and kindly towards others and ourselves. So to be open-hearted and generous in our kindness and compassion towards ourselves and others. So an example to give with the body, obviously, we would give a material thing. So in the case of the poor, we provide what the poor need, not what we think they need, but what they actually need, With speech, we are supportive, generous and kind with our speech so that those in need feel supported. They receive the gift of our presence and our heart. And then with the mind, we always maintain a kind of openness of giving, a spirit of giving in the mind toward others and towards ourselves. So with ourselves, for example, the paramita of generosity is to have appropriate, food, water, look after our health, take medicine when we need it. We need to be generous towards our own health and well-being. Of speech, it's sort of to cut negative self-talk. And then obviously of the mind, it's to be, generous about one's well-being, to sort of be open and giving around one's well-being. So discipline or ethics. So it's interesting to know that the Sanskrit word used for this paramita is sila, which is also translated as ethics. So although we often use, it's often seen it's discipline. Usually we see that how it's listed. But sila means ethics, which the main thing about that is ethical discipline, which for a Buddhist can be summarized simply as non-harm. To do no harmful thing with body, speech, or mind. It also means to take every opportunity to be kind and compassionate. So one interesting thing is by keeping the ethical precepts, the foundational vows of the Dharma, what sometimes you call the refuge vows, we're already in general helping others. Living ethically and keeping the precepts are already in general helping others, albeit indirectly. So this is the thing. This one is about fundamentally about non-harm, but it's also about living ethically, holding the precepts. So an example of that, to make sure that in our daily life, wherever we can, we avoid harming others with our body. So not to hit or harm, or definitely not to kill sentient beings. With our speech, not to say harmful words, not to attack or yell or call people names. With our mind, to not even have a thought of dislike or disapproval or judgment about others. Likewise, to oneself. Self-harm is not okay. So we need to be, we need to have the discipline of being kind to ourselves, which on a sort of very fundamental level means to, look after our health and well-being, but also to make sure we're practicing Dharma, keep the ethical precepts, practice the Dharma. That's fundamental self-care in a Buddhist context. So the next one is patience, and that paramita dissolves anger, hatred, and frustration. It is the root of non-harm, actually, patience. So patience is fairly self-explanatory. I don't really need to explain to you what patience is. Jamyang Tenphel, my teaching partner, inspired by the wisdom mind of his guru, Kyabje Chogchen Amtrin, often says, with time and patience, everything dissolves naturally. Everything changes on its own without us having to do a single thing. So in a way, patience is the ultimate remedy for all disturbing emotions and negative thought patterns, because they are all adventitious. They're not inherent to our nature. They're temporary and passing. They'll fade. Apply patience and just wait it out. They will fade. Sometimes you might need a little extra assistance with something quite sticky like anxiety or panic or depression, but they will fade. Patience is helpful in that sense. The next paramita is joyful effort or diligence. This paramita is actually a little complex. The word in Sanskrit for this paramita is viriya, hopefully I'm saying that right, which translates literally as energy. But it has a quality of joyfulness, of exuberance and enthusiasm, but also of perseverance and fortitude. So that paramita is about approaching the Dharma with joyful enthusiasm, with energy and fortitude. It's also about engaging in kindness and compassion toward others joyfully. So as an example, if we're helping someone out, say we're helping them move house, goodness forbid, it's an awful thing. But if we are helping someone move house, we do it joyfully, with enthusiasm. You don't grumble and mope and moan and make them feel bad for asking for our help. You help others joyfully with enthusiasm so that they feel okay about having asked for help, and so they really receive the gift of the help, rather than it becoming mixed up with, well, they didn't really want to help me. One of the most awful things to feel when you need help is that the person helping you doesn't really want to help you. So, apply joyful enthusiasm to the help of others. It removes that. They really feel like you want to help them, they care, and that you care, and then they feel helped. They feel better. Also, applying joy to our Dharma practice is profoundly transformative. It literally, the Buddha said that there's no enlightenment without joy. It's one of the 7 factors of awakening, which also include things like mindfulness, equanimity, relaxation. So without joy, there's no enlightenment. It's not possible. So this one's really kind of complex because it's both about joy, but also about enthusiasm and about perseverance of effort, putting the effort in. So the next one is concentration, which also is sometimes called mindfulness. So it's useful to know that the Sanskrit word for this one is smriti or sati in Pali. You might have heard the word sati. It's bandied about in the New Age world quite a bit. Both of those words, smriti and sati, are translated as to remember. So that's quite interesting. It means to be aware of reality, to have our awareness awake, lucid, to be aware of what's going on in each moment. But it also means to remember the Dharma, remember the teachings, remember the teachings about impermanence, sunyata or emptiness, but especially the teachings on Buddha nature. This is particularly, I think, coming from my own tradition. So the sort of most potent or powerful mindfulness or remembering is to remember Buddha nature in each moment, in every moment, remember that. And what that means, the absolute equality and divine presence of all sentient beings. To remember that. Always recollect that. So that's what that one means. The next one, wisdom, means a lot. On the ultimate level, it's enlightenment, which we can't really properly describe. But so on the ultimate level, that is the realization of sunyata or emptiness. On the relative level, it's about receiving teachings, reflecting on those teachings, and then applying those teachings. And through that process, receiving teachings, reflecting on the teachings, applying the teachings, then this discriminating wisdom begins to emerge, combined with our ethical conduct and our joyful enthusiasm and our generosity and our patience. We start to sort of really have a very positive sense of what's ethical, what's not ethical, what's the appropriate thing to do in any given situation, how to help others, how to practice. All these things become things that we understand. So, I think whenever we talk about wisdom on the relative level, it's always about, how to receive the teachings, how to reflect on those teachings, and then how to apply those teachings, So in this context of the paramitas, how do we receive the teachings? Well, it's a good idea not to think, oh, we know what they are. We know what this means. I've got this covered. It takes a little bit of openness when we're hearing the teachings, not necessarily from me, but from all Dharma teachers, what the paramitas are, what they mean, and how to apply them. Then reflect on, okay, what does that mean for my life, my day-to-day living, and how can I apply them? And then actually applying them and remaining mindful of what's happening while you're applying these paramitas. So an interesting thing, I'll talk about specific practices we can do to apply the paramitas in our daily life in a minute. I just want to take a slight sidestep, I suppose. So according to Düddul Rinpoche, my teacher, the paramitas, the 6, can be applied to our practice of the paramitas itself, which is quite interesting. So we can apply all 6 of the perfections to our practice of each individual one, if that makes sense. So the generosity aspect of each paramita is to introduce other beings to that particular transcendent perfection. So if we're talking about patience, the generosity aspect of patience is to share the value of patience with others. Simple. And then the discipline aspect is to avoid anything that runs counter to the particular paramita that we're practicing. So if we're practicing generosity, we avoid being miserly, quite simply, you know. And then the patience aspect is to be unmoved by difficulties in the practice of that paramita. So, for example, generosity. We feel clinging, we don't want to give a particular thing, we feel we don't have enough, so we can't give. That's resistance. And so the patience aspect is to be unmoved by that resistance and just give anyway, you know, sensibly, always sensibly. You know, you can't, generosity to ourselves, others, and the Dharma means that no one should be disadvantaged in this equation, you know. So you don't give away so much that you then can't afford to eat. You know, you have to be really kind of sensible about this stuff. Then the diligent aspect is to be joyful and make effort in practicing that paramita. So be joyful and enthusiastic in practicing generosity. Be joyful and enthusiastic in practicing patience, you know. And then the concentration aspect is to keep the mind one-pointedly focused on the virtuous goal of that particular perfection. So let's say we're talking about generosity again. That dissolves miserliness and greed. Patience dissolves anger, hatred, and frustration. You know, so they each have a virtuous goal. They achieve the ultimate goal is freedom from suffering, which will enable us to help all other sentient beings be free as well. That's the ultimate goal. But the relative goal is we undo anger, we undo greed, we undo attachment, we undo these things. So that's the virtuous goal of that particular perfection. And then the wisdom aspect of each of the perfections is to practice them without any concept of subject, object, or action. Now, this is a bit deep. So this is about sunyata, or emptiness. So at first, we will feel, I am being generous to this person, and the act is giving. So the subject is ourselves, object is whoever we're giving to, action is the giving, right? So there's these 3 things. But those are all fabrications. So our sense of us being a separate self is a fabrication. The sense of someone being separate is a fabrication, and the act of giving is based, therefore, on this sense of separateness. And therefore, there's some even very subtle self-clinging and self-grasping involved, you know. But as we progress and we deepen in our meditation and emptiness becomes live, a heart awareness, rather than just a conceptual thing, then the self begins to dissolve, the sense of others dissolves, and the idea that there's any transaction here between the two dissolves as well. It's a bit deep. It's not easy to communicate that. If with some things in the Dharma, there's this phrase, you know, if you can't understand it or accept it, just trust the conqueror. Just trust the Buddha. This is true. This is one of the things that we might need to just trust will happen in the end. So, and I said, if we had time, and I think we do have a little bit of time, in closing, I just summarize the Mahamudra or Dzogchen approach to the paramitas. So, as I said, you know, all of the disciplines, all of the traditions, they approach these things differently. So just to repeat, the Sutrayana, they actively renounce the opposite of the paramita. So with generosity, they renounce greed, you know. In the Mahayana, we then cultivate the paramita itself. So we cultivate generosity, cultivate patience. In the Mahamudra and Dzogchen approaches, which is more mystical, which is more focused on this emptiness thing, we tend to emphasize that the paramitas flow from openness, from inner renunciation as well as outer renunciation. That the paramitas are part of our nature, you know, rather than external separate things that we have to get good at, you know. It's part of our nature to be generous. It's part of our nature to be patient because we have Buddha nature, you know. It's part of our nature to be joyous. It's part of our nature to be ethical, to be kind, compassionate, and loving. It's part of our nature. All right, so just to close up, I'll share a quote from Milarepa. Perfectly give up belief in it. So I'll just start again there. Perfectly give up belief in any true existence. So that's about that subject, object, and action thing. There is no generosity other than that. Perfectly give up guile and deceit. There is no other discipline. So that's about, in this setting, in this sense, it's self-guile, self-deceit, as well as deceiving others. But it's about thinking we're more spiritually advanced than we are, feeling superior to others, deceiving others about our so-called spiritual accomplishments. You know, fundamentally, all beings in their nature are the same as the Buddha. So there cannot be high or low. This is contrary to Dharma. There's no superior or inferior being. There isn't. So that's about giving up that self-guile, self-deceit, and deceiving others about where you are on the path. If you feel in any way more spiritual than others, you're less spiritual than practically everybody else. Anyway, that might be hard, but it's true. There is no other discipline than giving up guile and deceit. Perfectly transcend all fear of the true meaning. This is sunyata, emptiness, right? There is no other patience than transcending all fear of the realization of emptiness. That might seem strange to us, but shunyata or emptiness does cause some people to be afraid because they think, what do you mean there's no inherent existence? What do you mean that I have no inherent self-nature? It makes them feel tense and stressed sometimes because they're interpreting it in a kind of a nihilistic way. So this is to say, give up on that fear. You know, and in meditation, at times, you can drop into states of non-self and vastness and oneness and openness that if you don't have the basics covered, the fundamentals of the Dharma, that can be a shocking experience. And I know many people who've had these sorts of experiences in meditation and they had no framework around which to understand, deal with it, move on from it, cultivate it, or not cultivate it, but embrace it, so that it created anxiety and panic, you know. So that's what this one means. Perfectly transcend all fear of the true meaning. There is no other patience. And then perfectly remain inseparable from the practice. In Dzogchen and Mahamudra, we call this like non-meditation, which actually means that you don't necessarily need the formal posture anymore. You're abiding in your true nature, in your Buddha nature, in perfect luminous awareness at all times. Whether you're sitting, walking, sleeping, eating, drinking, laughing, watching a movie, jogging, whatever you're doing, patting a puppy dog, you know, feeling the sustain of a kitty cat. Your awareness is always there, rich and livid, you know. So that's what that one means. So that one is perfectly remain inseparable from the practice. There is no other joyful effort. Perfectly stay in the natural flow. So what's that? That's the natural flow of luminous awareness, Buddha nature. In various traditions, it's called various different things, you know, clear light mind, Buddha nature, Tathagata Garbha, Sugata Garbha. In the Dzogchen tradition, it's called Rigpa. You know, in Mahamudra, it's called Mahamudra. So it's just to stay in the natural flow. There is no other concentration. And then the final one, perfectly realize the natural state, meaning Buddha nature. There is no other wisdom. So this one, you can see quite hard, you know, to perfectly give up belief in any true existence. You can cognitively do that, but to feel that as a heart truth, that is not easy. And that's why this step-by-step process of engaging with the paramitas is so important, because it can get us to this place, you know. So I'll just really kind of quickly cover how to apply the paramitas in daily life. This is very simple. So in our tradition, what we do is if we're going to engage the paramitas, we would, one, understand what the paramitas are, what their benefits are. So that's sort of receiving teaching. We can read, we can watch YouTube videos, we can get teachings from a live human. However we get that, it's fine. So we just understand what the paramitas are and what their benefits are. Number two, then we apply them. And in our tradition, we apply one paramita over a kind of a year period, 2 months at a time. So for 2 months, you're applying the paramita of generosity. So, and that means every day, perform an act of generosity of body, so material giving. Every day, perform an act of generosity through speech. So say something kind, say something compassionate to someone. And number three, perform an act of generosity of mind. And in this context, you know, at the beginning of the path, that means sit in meditation. That's generosity to one's mind, generosity to others, sit in meditation. So we do that for 2 months. We would apply generosity. And then we would also keep a journal, and we would reflect on what our actions were each day of body, speech, and mind, how we felt when we were performing those actions, and we would pay particular attention to any resistance, you know. We'd also remember what Düddul, which I said about applying the 6 paramitas to each one individually. That's really helpful, actually. So, and in our reflection, we go, okay, well, I didn't really want to do that, but I did it anyway, you know, and take note of the outcome. So, you know, if you give something, what's the outcome? What's the benefit in the giving, you know? Take note of how you felt about it. And then over time, you'll see that as you give every day, give, you know, each day of body, speech, and mind, you'll notice over 2 months, and you can extend it for longer than that if you like, but that's kind of the minimum. You will see that you become more and more happy to give, and you start to see more and more the benefit it brings others. You're noticing it more. The benefit side is more obvious. And you're really aware of how your mind works around this thing called generosity. And that tells you about the degree to which your attachment, you know, is around what particular thing. You know, so in that 2 month period, you can mix it up. You can give away a little bit of money, give away, you know, a pair of your favorite shoes. You know, traditionally we try to give away things that we are attached to, you know. So pay attention to how you're going, and then you'll start to see the things that you're really attached to. So you'll see where your attachments are strongest. And that's a clue as to what you should give, you know, because you need to work on that attachment. That's self-grasping, because that attachment and self-grasping feeds the sense of a separate, solitary, isolated, suffering self, you know. Also, a truly generous mind is not an uncomfortable state. There's nothing to lose here. So just give it a go, you know, and then you move on to the next one. So then for 2 months, you would apply, the next one, which in this list is discipline or ethics. So in that, we become super aware of non-harm. And so what's the opposite of non-harm? It's to be beneficial and to extend the life of beings, you know. So in that one, we would try to, you know, if we see an animal that's suffering, we help rather than leave it to somebody else. If we see, you know, after a storm, sometimes you see little worms and they're out in the open and they're being attacked by ants, you know, gently remove the ants and move the worm. You know, every day try and extend the life of some being. It might mean, you know, donating money to a hospital, donating money to the earthquake fund, you know, the rescue efforts there, donating money to UNICEF, to extend the life of children who are in war zones, etc. So you think about, how can I reduce harm? How can I extend life? And you do something of body, speech, and mind every day. It doesn't have to be a massive thing. But I say that can really be as simple as, you know, saving a worm, saving an ant, being more careful as you walk around, so you're not stepping on things all the time, being careful about your speech, about saying harmful things, you know, and your mind, being careful about how often negative, you know, and you know, hateful and angry thoughts rise in the mind, and counter them, you know. So in terms of the mind, if you're having angry and hateful thoughts about a person or, maybe an animal even, you counter that with another idea. Like, oh, well, that person's just suffering like I am, So why would I be angry at them when they're acting out of their own suffering in the way that I act out of my suffering, So you do this every day. And then you move through, and then the next one's patience, obviously. So every day you apply patience, particularly around anger, hatred, frustration. Also, you can apply this in meditation on the mind level, so body, speech, and mind, but on the mind level, you can just apply patience in meditation. As thoughts kind of arise and you feel irritated and distracted in your meditation, you can just apply patience. Those thoughts will go. That emotion will fade. It's what they do. Just apply patience, wait them out, and they will dissolve, they will dissipate. So, and then, you journal. Like, I've been applying patience. The body act was this, the speech act was this. So in a speech act, that's like, it's less about what you say and more about giving space to others, So giving people the opportunity to speak without interrupting them, waiting your turn, And then the mind, you can be patient in your meditation. You can be patient around if someone's doing something in front of you that's really irritating you. You just, in your mind, you just take a breath, just let go and wait a minute and let it pass, let that irritation pass, And then obviously you go through them all. Next one's joyful effort or diligence, and then mindfulness, and then wisdom. So in the wisdom one, what we would do is we would receive teaching, reflect on the teaching, and apply those teachings. So with this practice of the 2 months and journaling and reflecting, we're already doing that. So each 2-month period on the other paramitas, we're already doing this one. We're already receiving teaching. We're already reflecting on the teaching. We're already applying the teaching. So we just journal about that and be aware, okay, I am receiving teaching. What does that mean? What posture should I adopt when I'm receiving teachings? What should my mind be like? It should be open. It should be welcoming. It should be, unbiased. Still with some critical faculty, so you can determine, how can I apply this to my life? And then once you're applying it, is it working? Is this helping me? You need that critical faculty there, but not sort of judgment. So that's basically it. The really easy way to apply the paramitas over a period of time. And the thing that I think is really important about giving yourself that time of 2 months or more over a year is to really embrace one paramita at a time. And they do build, but if you find at the end of 2 months, there's still a lot of attachment, you still don't really want to give up that favorite pair of shoes. You really want to keep them, maybe extend that for another month and keep trying. I'm not saying you should give away everything that you hold dear, but at the very least, be aware of what you hold dear and be aware that it won't bring you any happiness or joy. It won't last even. So all this attachment will lead to suffering eventually. So that's why I let it go. It will lead to suffering, this attachment. And the doing of these paramitas, it reveals where we're attached, where we have aversion, where we are impatient and frustrated, where our ethics are not quite right. We harm carelessly. We're not really thinking about insects. We're not really thinking about fleas or leeches. So just be aware of that. And also with the wisdom one, just be aware that we all receive teachings, and that nothing that we know comes from our own effort. Everything comes from our teachers. We learn how to do the ABCs and then to write from people. We learn how to drive a car from people. We learn how to clean our teeth, brush our hair, get dressed, tie our shoes from people. Likewise, in the Dharma, nothing that we know comes from us. Our efforts are involved, but it comes from our teachers. So show some sort of sense of gratitude there. And on top of that, any kind of beneficial experience you have in the practice. So my generosity is loosening up. I'm becoming more giving. don't make that something that you grasp. Let that go and understand this has come from the teachings of the Paramitas. This has come from the Buddha. This giving capability that I now have came from the Buddha. It's a gift from the Buddha, or from your teacher or whoever. Okay, so that is it. Will we do the dedication now or after question and answers?
We can do it now.
Oh, that was fun. Sorry, I missed your answer.
Just making sure everyone's on par. So, Pema, we have half an hour for questions and answers. So perhaps if we can do dedication of merits at the end.
Sure. There's a lot of things in the chat. Do you want to lead
yeah,
that?
very much. I certainly can. Thank you. And I just want to say thank you for that overview. That was a great overview of the Paramitas from different traditions, and also some really good tips about the day-to-day practice of the Paramitas. And I particularly like what you suggested about practicing each of the Paramitas, each of them for 2 months, and keeping a journal and reflecting on that. That's great. So I'll certainly be...
Actually, that comes from my teacher, so it's not my idea.
Okay. I like the citation. Thank you. And just on that point about the different traditions, so we do have someone who's made a comment in the chat, and I invite everyone who are online as well as those in person as well. If you have any questions or comments, pop it into the chat. For those in person, you can write it down as well and pass them over to me, and I'll facilitate the Q&A. So the comment is this, Pema. You mentioned in the Sutrayana, the focus is to actively let go of the opposite of the paramita to practice. Interesting to note, right effort in the Noble Eightfold Path in Sutrayana has 4 aspects. 1, abandoning what is unskillful that has arisen. 2, preventing future unwholesome states that have not arisen from arising. 3, developing what is wholesome that is yet to arise. And 4, maintaining, for maintaining wholesome states that have already arisen. What is wholesome is the paramita. What is unwholesome is the opposite. If one practices this wholeheartedly, I find there is less of a difference compared to other approaches, perhaps. Just an observation.
No, I would say that's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think when I talk about the different approaches, generally speaking, these days, there's not really a division. We practice the Sutrayana, we practice the Mahayana, and we practice whatever else we're practicing, together. There's no kind of separation. So whatever kind of like methods or tools or knowledge from your tradition that makes it a rich and meaningful and transformative experience for you, you use. There's no contradiction. There's like on the superficial level, relative level, there may be some contradictions. But on the ultimate level, there's no contradiction at all. It's all perfect and pure. Yeah. Great.
Yeah, good observation. Would you say that perhaps one of the possible differences between them is what you were saying earlier about this practice in the Mahayana tradition, which is that the practice of the paramitas is not just a practice of the qualities within oneself, but it is the practice of it in order to be generous to others, to be able to offer this for the benefit of other sentient beings as well.
Yeah, the Mahayana tradition, you're actively cultivating that for the benefit of others. So
yeah.
on the sutra level, you're renouncing its negative so that you transform. And then on the Mahayana level, you're doing it for the benefit of others, but also that also has, a benefit for oneself, because as I said, a giving, generous mind is not an unhappy mind. A patient mind is not an unhappy mind. So there's a flow through. Remember at the beginning I talked about like we do it for others primarily because we're very good at putting ourselves in the center of everything. But we apply these to others, ourselves, and the Dharma. And there's also like one of the considered to be the most powerful use of the paramitas is around the Dharma. So in terms of generosity, giving to the Dharma, sharing the Dharma, and practicing the Dharma are very kind of potent acts of generosity. Yeah.
Great, thank you. All right, we have a question from someone in the audience. So the question is, how to overcome an addiction that I have? So is there a way through the practice of the paramitas that we can overcome addiction?
I think addiction is not to be messed with. So when we're tackling something like that is quite difficult and also multi-layered, you know, so multi-layered, we need to make sure that we're receiving the appropriate support. And if we're using Dharma in approaching things like addiction, trauma, depression, things like that, that we're not going into it blinkered with rose-coloured glasses. So yes, in the long term, Dharma can help with all things. That's true. But in the short term, we need these supports, which is like healthcare, psychological care, support of family and friends, having fun, you know, getting our minds off this constant cycle of misery and suffering by engaging in positive things, you know. So what I would say is, yes, in the long term, the Dharma undoes all desire, all attachment. And remember, addiction is about trauma. So Dharma does loosen and undo trauma, but it takes time. And so in the meantime, you need to really make sure you're not like doing yourself a disservice by not also engaging with all of the things that help with addiction and trauma. So counselling, decent healthcare, well-being practices like relaxing, getting some exercise, sitting in the sun, and also lubricate the mind with joy. You know, so if you've got anything sort of like addiction, trauma, depression, anxiety, panic, joy should be something you do every day. You should take at least, you know, I mean, this seems, to me, seems so not enough. At least 15 minutes to do something that makes you feel really joyful. It can be quite simple, sitting outside in the sun, having a cup of tea, going to a funny movie, watching a Netflix funny movie, having a chat with friends, hugging a doggy, hugging a cat, if they don't scratch you. You know, anything like that should be a part of it. Like this connection with joy and well-being and healing is super important. But also Dharma for the long-term solution, and then for the immediate care, you know, therapist, GP, family and friends, whole network of support. Because like suffering is universal, but it's very specific to the individual. So there's no universal practice of paramitas and that'll work, you know. There's not, and the Buddha was very clear about this, you know. It was very clear that you couldn't expect for a complex problem one simple answer, you know, because he talked about the multiple factors that cause the situation. So sometimes there needs to be multiple factors to resolve that situation, you know. So that's what I would say. I would say, yeah, practice paramitas, they'll help, but also do these other very sensible things, which the Buddha advocated, you know.
Great. Yeah, for sure. And I've received some further intel from the person who asked the question. And the person said, actually, it's mainly to do with alcohol. So alcoholism.
Yeah. Again, that's a disease that needs to be treated as a disease. The kind of like the first step for this, for me, is understanding that we're all trapped in samsara. We are all suffering. We all are acting out from our misperception, you know. So to remove any sense of self-judgment, blame, self-hatred, dislike, that's the first step, you know, to connect with one's fundamental goodness, as one of my teachers calls it. Connect with your fundamental goodness. Try and really, in terms of patience and generosity, in terms of the mind, you know, counteract that negative self-talk, you know, and understand that like diabetes, like heart disease, like myalgic encephalomyelitis, like long COVID, this is a disease. So, you know, it's blameless. Get that clear, connect with your fundamental goodness, move into a healing process that will require quite a lot of support. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Pema. Now, we do have a question from someone here in Metta Centre from the audience. So the question is, to way of letting go of traits in myself and seeing other people's traits, that's not the same as my traits. So comparing my traits with others, is that too much? Ways of letting go of the self.
Okay, so my teacher, honestly, it's not a fan club for my teacher, but my teacher always said, don't judge others. I mean, he went into much more detail than that, but I'm simplifying it. Don't look at others' behaviour, because that is a form of harm. I often say judgment is violence. Judgment is harm, you know. And I mean judgment in that sense of, oh, this person's doing a bad thing. You know, it's not to say that we let them get away with it, or we don't act to prevent harm. We don't, we don't use the justice system. Of course we use the justice system. You know, the Buddha said to abide by the laws of the land that we live in, you know, except unjust ones, which we're allowed to try and change, which he did himself. But to judge others is part of harm. And ethical discipline is around not doing that, you know. And the way to not do that is to simply understand we're all trapped in cyclic existence. No one is free of these driving negative emotions, these very debilitating emotions, this complete misperception of reality that we're stuck in. No one's free of that. So we all do things. We all do things that are, you know, not great until we really firmly place ourselves on the path. And of course, if you believe in reincarnation, we've all been everything. You know, we've all been great saints and sages, every one of us, and we've all been serial killers. You know, we've all been everything. So there's no place for judgment. We're all being driven by the same winds, you know. So we need to accept that, and then it lets go, you know. But also we cling to ourselves as being good and others as being bad. So then we have to really look at ourselves and go, well, how, you know, I do bad things. You know, I told a little white lie the other day. You know, I swatted a mosquito. I mean, I'm saying little things because mostly we just do little things. Most of us are quite ethical. But sometimes there are bigger things that we're driven, you know, by our habitual tendencies to do. And we really, like, quite frankly, are out of control. And I think in the sutras, they use the metaphor of a drunken elephant just rampaging around, you know. It's got no clue what it's hurting or harming or what it's doing. This is what we are. We're drunken elephants on a rampage, you know. So just accept this is how we are, that's how they are. The thing is not to judge them or do anything with them, or you know, it's to change our own mind. As I opened with that quote from my teacher, to tame the mind is the Dharma. You know, if you're taming your mind, you'll be free, you know. So really you start here. And one of those things is to loosen that judgment that we have around others. The other thing is it's completely normal and natural to feel that way because we're driven by this samsaric cycle we're in. So it's quite natural to feel that judgment. So also don't have any sort of like, oh, I'm a bad person for having judgment. You know, it's just the nature of samsara, and we just settle the mind, apply the paramitas over time.
Great, thank you. Now we've got some questions about compassion. So hi Pema, thank you for all the practical tips on how we can apply the 6 perfections in our daily life. It's very useful. What is the difference between wise and unwise compassion? How can we tell the difference in practicing the paramitas in daily life?
Okay, so this is going to be harsh because any compassionate action we engage with from this position of I and other is imperfect. Every single thing. It's always tainted, even just a little bit, by self-clinging, but also by egocentrism. Self-clinging means I'm here. I'm a good person. I'm doing a compassionate thing. And egocentrism is enjoying the good feeling of being a good person, doing a compassionate thing. But also, from this position of a deluded being trapped in samsara, we don't know how to help. You know, and I mean, this is a sad truth. But when you look at all of the things we do to try and help, very little of it helps. You know, even as societies, we've tried to wipe out poverty. We've tried to wipe out war. We've tried to wipe out sexism. We've tried to, you know, as societies, we've tried to do these things. And unfortunately, we have failed because we're coming from a position of this deluded perception. We don't know actually what to do. And there's even if it's just a tiny bit, there's some self-grasping, self-clinging there, which means everything we do will be impermanent, always impermanent anyway, and it won't have necessarily a positive effect. Sometimes even we do what we think is the good thing, the right thing to try to help, and it leads to more suffering because we can't predict the outcome either from this position. So unfortunately, we can't do anything but the impermanent relative stuff right now. But as we move through the perfections, our self-grasping and self-clinging starts to loosen up, and then we start to give completely without any sense of what it brings to us. And we start to be patient, not because we want to be patient and serene and calm, but because it helps the other person to be patient, you know? So it starts to happen, and the way to see is as you're going through the process, you become more relaxed. I know this seems weird, but one of the 7 factors of awakening, which are crucial to becoming a Buddha, is to be relaxed. So that has to be there, you know, and that is actually a natural fruit of these paramitas. You start to feel relaxed. You're happy to give. Cool. You're happy to wait in line. It's cool. You know, you're happy to do your practice. It doesn't bother you. You're happy to do it. You start to just feel kind of content and relaxed. That's a sign that the self-grasping is starting to loosen up.
Thank you. So the 6 paramitas is now 6.5 paramitas, and the extra one is the relax. The perfect.
That's a different list, but relaxation is actually, relaxation is actually in most of them. It's an aspect of most of them, and it's in wisdom. So it's just kind of hidden.
Excellent. Okay, we've got another question about compassion. Can our need for self-compassion ever override actions of compassion towards others?
Yes. Simply. Yeah. But the thing is, we need to get this balance right between, we're not wanting to become martyrs, and the Buddha did not advocate that. Buddha walked away from these extreme ascetic self-denial type practices. He walked away from them. He said, through his action, these do not work. These don't work. He advocated a middle way, a gentle way, you know. So we need to get this balance right between care for oneself in terms of our well-being so that we can practice. If you can't practice, if you like neglect yourself, don't feed yourself, you know, neglect your feelings and your boundaries so that you're just a nervous wreck all the time, you can't practice, you know. So usually when people are talking about self-compassion, they're worried about they're protecting their boundaries because something bad's happened to them. So they're creating boundaries to protect themselves. This is necessary and essential, right? But you need to make sure that you're not building too big a wall to protect yourself from further harm, you know. So it's a difficult thing, and it's very personal. Everyone will be different because everyone has different sufferings, you know. They're all equal, but they're all quite different. So people need to sort of just look at, am I working on creating a helpful, safe boundary to prevent further harm because I've been harmed by these people before? Or am I just shutting down, you know? And the way to work on that is actually the paramitas. So you start by giving, you know, and if someone's harmed you, you know, you don't necessarily make them the object of your giving. You just give generally, you know, to yourself, which means have a nice bath, eat some chocolate gelato, just be kind of kind to oneself and gentle and access all the healing you need, but also give to others, you know, maybe who are in the same situation you're in. So if you experience trauma or abuse, etc., you know, give to organizations that support those people, be a kind ear to people who need to talk about what they're going through, those sorts of things, you know, and you will quickly figure out when that wall is a bit too thick. You know, it's just kind of protecting yourself when there's no need, you know, because as with like anxiety, panic and all these things, they have a value. But an anxiety disorder is when that value is overblown. You know, it's no longer a value to you. It's actually destroying your life. The same is true for these sort of protective things we do, self-compassion, you know. And as I've said before, this might seem a bit hard, but the quickest way to stop feeling, you know, damaged and hurt and that you need self-compassion is to open to others, to just open to others in a kind of like balanced, healthy way, I think.
So having some balance and boundaries. That's also
really good.
Wisdom, right? Okay, so we've probably got time for just one more question. So earlier you spoke about luminous awareness, and you also, of course, wrote a book with the same title as well. Could you share a little bit more about this?
Yeah. So in one of the early sutras, I'm not sure, I think it's the Prubhasa Sutra. Forgive my terrible pronunciation of Pali and Sanskrit words. I grew up in Queensland. That's my excuse. Anyway, I think it's the Prubhasa Sutra. The Buddha says, luminous is the mind, O monks. Those who cannot see the luminous nature of the mind cannot become enlightened. He says this very clearly. That's a paraphrase, not a direct quote. So the Buddha, and in another quote, the Buddha says, look to the luminous, perfect nature of yourself. Again, I'm paraphrasing. And look to the luminous, perfect nature on which the world is founded. And thus, free yourself, correct yourself, is the phrase he uses. So in the very early sutras, the Buddha's talking about this luminous awareness, you know, which is ever present, never diminished, never absent, you know, ever present. But it's clouded by all the habitual thinking, feeling, and sensing we do, you know. So it's like described as like the sun behind the clouds. And so the clouds are our habitual thinking, feeling, so it's physical sensations and emotions and sensing of things we do, the physical sensations and stuff. So all of that, which is about the dualistic mind, the dualistic experience, clouds this luminous awareness that the Buddha pointed to. And in it's given different names in different traditions, but the idea is there in all of the Buddhist traditions. So the reason I quoted early sutras is because there's some idea that this is a Mahayana or a Vajrayana, as in Tibetan Buddhist, thing, but it is not. It's there in the very early sutras, and it persists in the Mahayana tradition. It's there in Vajrayana, and in the Dzogchen tradition, which is an outflowing of the Vajrayana tradition. It's there very strongly. So this luminous awareness is our ever-present Buddha nature. So the two things are the same. So all you need to do to connect with that ever-present luminous awareness is look to the gap between all the thinking, emoting, and sensing that we do, thinking, feeling, and sensing. Look between that stuff, and there is this lucid, clear awareness that is boundless like the sky. So it's very easy to find, but because of how crowded our minds are, the glimpse is very, 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 very brief. And we go, because we're looking for a firecracker moment, but enlightenment's not a firecracker moment. It's just waking up to our ever-present luminous awareness. And the only way to get there is to settle the mind. So we settle the mind how? Through shamatha, through meditation. And we can do these other things, the 4 immeasurables, love, compassion, joy, equanimity, the 6 paramitas. We can go through these processes to sort of reduce our self-clinging, and that does actually quieten the mind as well. But the only way to glimpse this true nature of ours, this Buddha nature of ours, this luminous awareness, is to settle the mind in meditation. And then it's vividly there. It's not hiding. You can just, even someone who's got very little meditation experience. I made a joke a few weeks ago that my cat does this, looks to their true nature. You see them doing it, but honestly, you just need to look to that gap, and there's a luminous awareness. The degree to which it's lucid and clear, right, is the degree to which the mind is calm. The dualistic mind is calm. So in Tibetan Buddhism, in this tradition, we have the idea that there's this dualistic mind, which in Tibetan we call sen, which just means dualistic mind. And then we have this luminous awareness, which we call rigpa, which means non-dual awareness, which has this luminosity. So it's really very simple to find, but very, very difficult to abide in that luminous awareness. And abiding permanently in that luminous awareness is enlightenment, Buddhahood. That's the state the Buddha was always in. So the Buddha says, luminous is the mind, O monks, because there are only monks present. The nuns were doing more important things that day, probably. So he said, luminous is the mind, O monks. Those who can't see that can't become enlightened. So really we have to look to our true nature. Only can be done through shamatha, through calm abiding meditation, which evolves naturally into vipassana. This idea that vipassana and shamatha are separate. Shamatha evolves naturally into vipassana, which is what? That awareness provides great insight to the true nature of things in the mind. So that's in a very, very short nutshell about that quite big thing, the true nature of mind.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. And for those who are online as well, and we'll pop this into the chat for those who are watching this later on our YouTube channel, the sutta that was referenced was the Upasa Sutta, and the link to that will also be in there as well. So we've got a further comment. No, we've got the Pahasara Sutta.
Pahasara. I knew I was saying it wrong.
And that will be in the link below. And for those who are...
Pahasara.
Yes.
Pahasara, yeah.
There we go. And for those who are also following us on WhatsApp for our group chat, we'll also pop it in there as well. So you've got that to read later on after this as well. So we just have one more comment, Pema, from an old friend of yours, Sinsin. So Sinsin says, nice to see you again, Pema. I'm not sure if this has been asked, but I just wanted to say...
Hi.
Just to say how admirable it is to know what you have gone through and the hardships you've had to face, and yet you show great resilience, compassion, and wisdom. That's from Sinsin.
Oh, thank you. But all down to my teachers, the Buddha, beginning with the Buddha and then all the way down. So the thing is, I had, I don't know if everyone knows, but like I had a kind of abusive childhood. And I had, as a result, trauma, anxiety, panic, depression, all this sort of stuff, and really quite debilitating for quite a long time. And then I started to apply the Dharma to those things, and they loosened over time. But I also, you know, I did myself find that the Dharma was, because I did also see therapists and stuff, but for me, it was the Dharma that finally and completely undid that. So I don't have anxiety or panic anymore. I don't have depression. I don't feel trauma anymore. I did very much feel it, you know, for a very long time. But I mean, honestly, it's not because of my effort, you know, because frankly, I'm not a great practitioner. It's because of the guidance that the Dharma gives, you know. The Dharma is so, I'm going to tear up.
Oh.
The Dharma is so perfect that it's the remedy for all ill. It's not my effort. It's the Dharma. And we can all use the Dharma to be fundamentally and completely and totally free. And I think it's really important because one thing that I think I had from birth, or very early childhood, I remember thinking about it, was this idea of innate perfection. Because I always looked at beings and thought, why are they doing this? Why are they behaving that way? They're innately perfect. Why are they being so weird? You know, I had that idea. And I think then when I found the teachings, that idea of, I didn't call it Buddha nature, obviously, but that idea of Buddha nature, it's a refuge. It's the first, like, real refuge. You know, you take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, but also you take refuge in your Buddha nature. And if you do that, you know, the practice becomes transformative. You can move out of your misery and into freedom. I have relative freedom, you know, from those particular things. I've got other stuff, you know. I'm not fond of power tool noise. Other stuff that I'm still working on, you know. But those things, because I placed the Dharma on them, they dissolved. So I think that's interesting. You know, I am proof that it happens. And I know other people who've done very similar things, so I'm not a unique story, you know. But thanks, Tin. You're very kind. This shows his or their kindness.
And thank you so much for that heartfelt sharing as well, Pema. Very, very inspirational, as Sin says. And thank you for taking the time as well to share the Dhamma with all of us today. It was such a great session. And so I'm now going to hand over the mic to our MC, Elise.
Thank you.
Dedication of merit. Who's doing the dedication of merit? Is that me or you?
Yes, I'm just about to get
Sorry.
But before that, I'd like to echo Tina. Thank you very much, Pema, and very inspirational to hear your story and to hear how the practice has transformed you. Because if it can transform you, it can transform all of us. And not a unique story, but pretty unique. So on that note, we'd like to invite you to give a dedication of merits or a closing prayer.
Yeah. So this is from our tradition. You can do any dedication of merit that you want. I always give a little bit of an explanation about why we do the dedication of merit, because I think it's important to understand what we're doing. And there's two reasons we do it. It reminds us that we're here for sentient beings. Everything should begin with our commitment to sentient beings. In the middle, our commitment to sentient beings should be sustained. And at the end, we should be reminded and should, you know, reassert our commitment to sentient beings. But also on the level of emptiness, sunyata, you know, everything's connected. So to dedicate the merit, it actually does have very real benefit. Okay. By this effort, may all beings be free of fear, sorrow, and pain. May all beings know wellness, tranquility, and love. May all beings abide in the perfect bliss and equanimity of their ultimate nature. Om Mahum. Thank you, everyone, for your presence. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Pema. We appreciate you.
Oh.
Thank you, Pema. Yes, exactly. Thank you for sharing your teachings and how to apply the 6 perfections. I think they're really awesome. And thank you, everyone.
Great.
Yes, and thank you, everyone, too, for your presence and for your questions. Before we close off, I have a few announcements about upcoming events from the Metta Centre. So next Wednesday, we have Venerable Galkande Dhammananda Thero. So he'll be coming in person to the Metta Centre. And the topic is on building harmony at home, work, and in community. Great follow-up to this week's topic. On Thursdays, starting from, I think, the 9th of March. So every Thursdays we're having mindful yoga classes with Maureen Jensen from 6 to 6:45. So Maureen teaches Hatha Yoga. It's a style of yoga that is suitable for all levels, and she incorporates a variety of traditions and modern practices in movement, breath work, and meditation. So if you're free on Thursdays at 6 to 6:45, please join us. Also, we have a Buddhist temple tour coming up on Sunday, 19th of March. So it's a whole day thing from 9 to 3:30 at Mountain Spring Monastery in Bilpin. So Mountain Spring Monastery, for those who don't know, was established by Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, and it's part of the Plum Village tradition. And also, we will be organising for Venerable Dhammadippa to come back to Metta Centre sometime next week to give a further Dhamma session due to popular demand. So it'll likely be Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. So check the website on Sunday to find out which day once we confirm for Venerable Dhammadippa. And so our ongoing talk is going to be both online and in person again. So you're welcome to join us in both venues. And our conversations about Metta Centre friends. So we have a WhatsApp group for Metta Centre friends. So please join us. It's the link is on the chat. And if you wish to subscribe to our emailing list, also the email is on the group chat, on the chat in Zoom. And we also invite you to make a donation to support Metta Centre's beautiful events currently and in the future. So that's all for tonight. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And we'll see you next week and in the other exciting events to come.
Thanks, Elise. And before everyone goes, sorry, one small announcement. We also have the Metta Convention, which is happening on the 26th of March. It's an online international convention. We have speakers from all around the world. It's going to be absolutely fabulous. More information will be is actually on our website. The teacher who is coming next week on next Wednesday, he usually lives in Sri Lanka. So he's coming to Sydney for a very short period of time. And so if you're able to come to the Metta Centre and to meet him, it will be great. We had him previously talk at the Metta Centre, and we very much look forward to him coming back again. Venerable Dhammadippa, as some of you may have met, he came very briefly from Czech Republic, and as Elise said, by popular demand, everyone was contacting us saying, we want to meet him again, he's so awesome. So I then contacted the person who was organising his trip, and we managed to just slip him in for one more visit in Sydney before he flies off again. So if you are around, I highly recommend for you to come over. Likely to be Monday or Tuesday, so just check out our Metta Centre website. So thank you for your patience for the announcements, and I'd love to see you soon at the Metta Centre. Thanks, Pema, again.